All right, I'll call the meeting to order.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here.
Trustee Alexander.
Here.
Trustee Holmes.
Here.
Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Rinucci.
Here. Here. Here.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming it was properly noticed. All right.
Lori?
All right, we will open citizen participation per Village Resolution 2017-01. Anyone wishing to address the village board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The village board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they are participating in a public hearing or if specifically allowed by a majority vote of the village board due to involvement in an agenda item. That said, I see a lot of don't call on me looks. All right, we will close citizen participation, move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Miscellaneous business, item 1, consideration of, and I am very sorry if I mispronounce your name, Bowden Bishel? Is that right? Eagle Scout project. Come on up. And just hit the button there and it will turn green.
Hello, I'm Bowden Bishel, and I am presenting my Eagle Scout project for a dog agility course. You should all have a copy of your slideshow, of the slideshow. Perfect. You should all have a copy of your slideshow in front of you. I'm with Troop 363 of Legion Post 375. The goals of building this dog agility course in your East Troy Dog Park is to provide more activities for the owners and the pets of the dog park and create a safe and entertaining environment for the dogs to get exercise. The benefits are for the socialization for the dogs and the owners, and socialization between the owners, and to bring more people to the dog park. Develop the dog's self-control and build confidence between the dogs and the owners. The closest courses are in Waukesha, and they are not open to self-training. So here are the different obstacles I plan to build: seesaw, weave poles, A-frame, hoop jump, dog walk, and hurdle. And that is about where I want to, about the positioning of where I want to put it and the size that it would take up. And in about this layout of different obstacles and the size that each one would take up. They're each 10 feet apart to allow for mowing in between. And there would be timber framing under each obstacle with gravel so that they don't have to be trimmed around. Here's my budget itemized for every obstacle and the timber framing and gravel base for a total of $1,600. You guys have any questions? I'm looking for final approval on the project so I can get started.
Real quick, what's your timeline that you're thinking?
I am planning to complete this before the school starts, end of August.
Do you have any assistance to give you some peace of mind, at least, that you'd be able to meet your date?
I've already planned a lot of how each obstacle will look and sketched them all out and got the amount of materials that I would need. I will, of course, have the scouts from my troop help me and workdays, help construct and install the obstacles.
That sounds good.
I just have one question on the fundraising. What did you do for fundraising?
I've done fundraising for many past years, and I've been saving. I helped with garbage and soda sales and Maxwell Street Days, and saving for many years.
So this is going to be wood construction. What type of painted? Are you planning on painting it too, or just leaving it pressure treated?
I am planning on using a deck stain for all of it.
You're the construction expert, that's why I'm looking at you, 40.
Were you planning on using the deck stain the same time you build it, or were you going to let it season for a year and then stain it? Sometimes on treated lumber, if you leave it out for a year in the weather, some of the osmosis treatment will evaporate out of the wood, so the wood will then accept the stain better. If you stain treated lumber right away, sometimes it doesn't stick too well, because you notice how heavy some treated lumber is? It's because it's got so much of that stuff pressured into it. You want it to at least dry out a little bit before you put the stain on it. And it's just a suggestion. I'm not saying you got to do it, but in my experience, that's what I found.
Look at
Since Jason's not here, Vicki, from a DPW standpoint, any concerns about that?
You hit it all right on the head.
Yep, okay. All right. I was going to say, you're our mowing expert too, so if you're happy with that. I like the placement on the park right next to the road. It's going to grab people's eye, and they're like, oh, wait, that's a dog park. I mean, I know there's a sign there, but, so
Right, there's nothing around here, because after he came and presented to the Park and Rec Board, I looked online, and the only one I could find was Waukesha, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but there's nothing close that has that, so.
Yeah, that one off the freeway, off I-43 that you can see?
Yeah, that's private.
Yeah, but that's private, right, yeah. So I'm thinking, yeah, where do these people actually get to practice this stuff? I can't imagine where they practice.
Or in their house, over chairs. Yeah.
all right, any other questions? Any other discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve the dog agility course.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you so much. It's a great addition. So,
Yeah,
great idea
thanks.
for your project, and good luck.
Yeah, awesome stuff, thank you.
Okay, item 2, consideration of David August's, owner of 2584 Main Street, plan to address zoning code compliance. So we have a memo here from Eileen. This is concerning LTR Power, which has relocated to 2584 on Main Street. So, Eileen, anything you want to highlight here?
I think just to summarize, the owner was sent the compliance letter, given 30 days to bring the property into compliance or bring a plan to the village board to allow for more time to come into compliance. So you will find attached to my memo the timeline that Mr. August has submitted. So the board should consider that. There is a current conditional use on that property for Wisconsin masonry that will need to be terminated, and they are working through some of the occupants moving before they can utilize more of the inside of the building. And Mr. August is here, and I think Dale Leisure is here as well. So if you would like them to speak or have questions for them, they're available.
If you have any, I know you were saying no during citizen participation, but if you have anything you want to add.
There you go. I'm in. Yeah, I'm here basically to answer any questions you might have about the conditional use we're seeking. And I think working with Eileen, we've got pretty well everything noted in here that's happening. Obviously, Brian is leaving. He's waiting to get one of the buildings out in the industrial park that's under construction. He plans on buying a bay in there for his stuff. But it's not complete yet, so we're kind of waiting as he has to have a place to go. But Dale is making use of what he can right now, and we'll kind of slowly move in as Brian moves out, you might say. I don't know what else to say other than it'll take a little bit of time for him to get all of his stuff moved. But other than that, I think the only other thing that's a little question was the display of some tractors outside, and we submitted a limit of 20 that, so that it wouldn't be overbearing. And that's about it, really. Most of the other details are outlined in here. So I guess if there's any questions, I'll field them best I can.
So when I drove past today coming up, there's quite a few more than 20.
Right.
I'm assuming that inventory will reduce as Dale's able to move inside of the building.
Yeah, right, because the other half where Brian is right now is where they'll be stored. And so he's a little crowded right now, but that should rectify itself as soon as Brian's gone.
I guess that was my concern too, the number of tractors there, the lawnmowers in front, tractors in front.
Sure.
Is there something magical about the number 20, or would you be satisfied with less than that?
Well, I feel like there's actually a section in front of the offices where there's a little grassy area, and we figured there's room for 4 there, and that would leave 16 out front, which is, not that many really. Because obviously it's, having them displayed is a way of attracting identification of who's there and what's being sold. So a few of them out there would be good. I felt like it was a reasonable number that I wanted to see if that would be okay.
Now, would these be new tractors, or would it include used as well?
I don't know, Dale?
Everything out there right now, well, all but 2 are new. There's 2 really high-quality grasshoppers sitting out there. They're worth like $12,000 a piece, so I don't think they're much for junk, So, that's the kind of stuff, I will not keep any used stuff around that's marginal, because it only causes me trouble. I have to stand behind it, and you buy it and come back and say, hey, this thing I just bought is no good, I'm better off to just get rid of it,
Yeah.
So it's all, anything I have there that's used is pretty high quality, and the rest of it's all new. Every model that out there, they're giving 2 grasshoppers, are new. So, and the reason biggest reason they're out there is I don't have any new grasshoppers to show off right now, so.
Okay.
And it plays a big part in my business for people to be able to see it. The first Monday we were there, we sold 3 lawnmowers, and in this dry weather. We haven't been selling very much. It was all because they were up there on Sunday goofing around looking at them. They came back on Monday and bought mowers. So it's pretty important to me to have stuff outside,
Can you talk more about the privacy fence, what it's going to be needed for, where it's going to be, when it may be going in, if required?
Well, the privacy fence was something that we kind of offered up to show our willingness to be cooperative in making sure that the property stays attractive. There really isn't a lot of plans to put a lot of stuff back there. It's because most of it will be stored inside. They don't want too much stuff back there really, but I think it's one of those things where if there's nothing back there, we're kind of leaving that up to you. We're throwing it out there and say, if you want us to put a privacy fence up, we will, but there may not be anything to hide, So if it's mostly, I think, a couple of dumpsters and kind of a place where people can drop their stuff off around the back and pick it up around the back, so it's a drop-off, pick-up thing. I don't know what else. Dale might know better. You said there was a locker of something, or?
Right at the moment, there's a workbench sitting back there in the lot.
Okay,
Just had no place to put it inside.
so, and that's up against the building there or something, so. So as far as, right, and so if there's something that's outside where you could see it driving by or something like that, and for some reason it was necessary, we'd put a privacy fence up with a gate so that it was hidden.
I think, we need to, for the purposes of tonight, just establish your timeline and the conditional use. I think then, once we're kind of past that point, we see how much room you've got to store things in the building.
Yeah.
I think things like the privacy fence are probably a more appropriate conversation with the planning commission.
Yeah, I think if it's required, we're willing to do it. If it's not, obviously, wouldn't have a need for it, but we're kind of leaving that out there so you know that we're willing, so.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, I have to ask another question. I know, Dale, you're familiar with the ventilation requirements for, and now is that, we're going to have to redo that again for this area, for your shop?
The site that Brian's on, it's got fans in there, that ain't not a problem, I don't think.
Okay, well, I would suggest maybe talk to the building inspector and go through that so we don't have to go into a big thing again.
Sounds good.
Any other questions about the timeline here to get to compliance?
Do you feel like you're going to be able to, everything I know is kind of based on the crux of Mr. Pluis being able to leave
Yeah.
and you can move in?
Well, this all came about pretty fast when Anderson Realty said, you're getting out.
I understand.
This all came about like that, I mean, so.
But you have no idea from Mr. Pluis what his timeline is?
I can speak to that. I've spoken with him. Basically, he said a lot of it depends on when that building gets done out there, because he has offered to pay for it. They said, you can't. They're not even taking anything for it yet. So he's waiting on that. As soon as he can buy it, he's moving.
Did they say 30 days, 60 days, half a year, a
He's got
year?
it in his letter here,
Yeah.
October 31st.
Yeah, October 31st is our target. He's saying he thinks that by October 31st, it seems like a reasonable time for them to get it done, for him to get moved. I said, I'm not going to make that a hard number. I'm going all the way to the end of January. If absolutely it's not done and he can't move, he might be partially moved or something. I don't know. I just thought we have no way of knowing because it's not in our control.
I guess, just for the sake of the conversation and on the tape, I wanted to get the date mentioned, that's why.
So I think, again, to the letter here, what you outlined is what we've got here. So the question is to the board, is there direction to staff about putting a pause on enforcing this while they get moving everybody around? And if so, what's the timeline that the board is interested in proposing?
Boy, I don't have a problem with January 31st. I mean, because you're talking about 3-month grace period from October 31st,
From
right?
October, right.
I don't have a problem with that myself.
Would you like to phrase that in the form of a motion?
All right, so I will move to approve the timeline submitted to bring the property back into compliance with the zoning code, and that would be January 31st.
I'll second it.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all for
All
coming.
right, thank you. I'm going to push the button now. Oh, leave it on? Oh, okay.
All right, item 3, everybody's favorite topic, budget. Item A, final. Yeah. Item A, final review of capital improvement plan with financial management plan, and B, direction to staff and any changes in service levels to incorporate into budget and other preliminary operational assumptions. We have Brian here, as always, from Ellers. Take it away.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you all for having me for the riveting budget discussion. So if you didn't recall, this is now what we kind of label Workshop 2, where every year we do a financial management plan to identify a couple of things, but one being your capital improvement plan. Then we kind of move into operations and kind of put the whole picture together. But for tonight, we're just looking to update you in terms of the revisions we made based off of what came out of the first workshop or initial capital improvement plan. So a lot of what I'm going to show tonight provides an understanding of the changes that have been made since, an understanding of the impacts as a result of those changes. Then we're looking to kind of get a refinement of our financial guidelines, or policies as needed, and then kind of just review the capital plan as a whole. There was kind of, can we see what this is maybe broken down more specifically? So I just kind of wanted to jump into that first here in terms of looking at what the capital improvement plan kind of looks at. So it was identified in the first workshop to look at the capital improvement plan kind of by funding source and department, more or less to highlight where the spend is for each department and how we're funding each of these projects. So this is less project specific, and this is more identifying the funding source as bolded here, and then under each funding source, identify the department in which is creating the sum of that funding source. So hopefully this kind of helps provide framework in terms of what the village would be looking to borrow for, which is, at the top, that first section where it says geo debt, and then identifies which department is, using geo debt. And like most communities, it's on streets and utilities, with a few other departments mixed in between. And then beyond that, kind of your fund balance or reserves, understand that that comes from a multitude of sources. That can be direct fund balance. What I mean by that is for the water and sewer utility, they each have their own fund balance or reserves that they would be paying out of. And then for the other departments, it would be most likely the capital projects fund, which you hold the fund balance for projects in order to pay out of. And then that tax levy, third section, does just identify what's our annual accrual of the capital projects levy that we allocate to our total levy, and what is that paying for. So we have kind of ongoing expenditures as a part of that, as well as accumulated expenditures. What I mean by that is that's not exactly dollars out the door, rather dollars that you're taking in as part of that capital levy, holding for a couple of years, saving, and then at a point in time later paying for it. And then finally, grants and aids, free money. So with that, that's kind of the breakdown of the capital projects list by funding source and department. Are there any kind of questions on that or comments or anything at this time?
Two questions.
Sure.
One is, any changes in the geodebt compared to what we've talked about?
Yep.
Okay.
So
How's that changed?
We added a 2027 issue. So prior, and I have this on a future slide, but you'll see there was kind of zero geodebt listed for 27 and 28. As we will reiterate here tonight, that put pressure on the capital projects fund balance, meaning that fund balance was depleting, and we didn't want that to happen. So that was kind of one of the things that we looked at, is identifying another geodebt issue. So that's what you're seeing by department, what the funding would be for the 2027 geodebt issue, which would cover 27 and 28.
Okay, so that's roughly 800, 900,000 then?
Correct.
Okay. And then, but no changes on the 2025 issue?
Correct.
All right. And then my second question is, we talked at our last meeting, I think, about the money for improvements on this building. And Eileen, I think you said we had about 675,000 in reserve for that. Am I right in that? Because I didn't see admin under fund balance or reserves.
Correct. That wasn't in the budget because we don't have the actual numbers. But yes, there is money reserved specifically for the municipal building, and then there's money that is committed for this project. The amount that had been committed is over $500,000. Off the top of my head, I can't remember that exact amount of the total line item. So there's a certain amount that wasn't committed. So it is over $600,000. I just can't remember the exact number.
Any other questions on this slide? Go ahead.
The one question I had would be for the replacement fund for the, I'm assuming DPW. And it goes from 80 to 45 to 15. And I guess I'm just curious, generally speaking, Jason is of the frame of mind to stay on a schedule of replacement. And it just seems odd that the last 2 years that I see here of 26 and 27 have 15,000 and 28 has 0.
Yeah, the one thing I would say there is I believe some of that is due to basically a determination of whether or not the project would be equipment fund replacement eligible at this point or not. So some of it's probably baked in between the fund balance reserves for the sewer utility. You'll see, like, for example, 2024 is about 206,000 and then 140, 105. So I think that's what part of it is just he hasn't explicitly identified that yet, but there's reserves available. It's just whether or not it's restricted or unrestricted. So. Is that it?
If you say so.
Yeah. Basically saying the money's there, it's whether or not if it comes out of that restricted fund balance. I would presume he probably looks at that more closely as they come along, but to date, I think we just kind of set it up.
I understand, I
open,
guess,
yeah.
and again, I'm not of the frame of mind of accounting like you and Mr. Johnson, or Eileen, or anybody else in this room but me. But the thing I'm looking at, though, is I know he gets dump trucks replaced on a regular schedule. We've got the generators that we have to take care of at the lift stations. And there's just a certain number of things and equipment that we're going to have to consistently kind of roll over. And it just looked odd that these numbers were all of a sudden dropped.
Yeah. I'll make a note, because I think if you want to provide kind of a more, he has to provide that list for the DNR, in order to say, here's our equipment replacement list. But if we want to be more explicit or proactive about that, we can certainly, yep.
If he's got it under control. If it's under control, fine. He said, I'm just asking that question.
I like your pivot table.
What's that?
I like your pivot table.
Okay. That was the primary goal of trying to find
It's a successful presentation.
Yeah, a meaningful and short-winded way to divvy this up, if you will. So, okay. Beyond that, again, as I stated in the goals section, a lot of what we're presenting tonight is to identify those changes and then also understand why we were making the changes. So this slide is I re-put in here, meaning I didn't touch this, I just put it in again, so as to say what were some of when we discussed the sources of funding concerns, what were some of the options that we provided to you for feedback. And just kind of reiterate those. So again, that was using abated debt, meaning debt that you claim on your levy limit worksheet is exempt of levy limits. So that's kind of your, what I would call your variable when you're solving for your total levy. Of course, you want to figure out other variables like how much is our operating budget and items like that. But knowing that it's exempt and you have abated debt, basically saying we could use that if we decided to. That, of course, comes with a tax rate impact, which we'll get into later, but that was one option. Another option was issue more debt, and that was something that was explicitly directed from the last meeting, is to say, can we add a 2027 issue and not have a GO debt limit penalty? That would go beyond our recommended or desired limit. And then what is the tax rate impact of doing that? Another option, of course, is a municipality can always go out for a referendum to adjust their total levy. That, of course, comes with a tax rate impact similar to using abated debt. And then restricting the levy to operations that would allow for more capital levy. What that basically means is you only get a ceiling of a total dollar amount of a levy, if we're not using abated debt, do we restrict one of them in order to increase the other? So this was all goals or with the goal in mind, of having that capital projects fund not be fully depleted. So, and then obviously we could look at some combination, which we did for tonight. So some of the changes, the biggest one was that the preliminary equalized values were released as of 8/1. That comes from the Department of Revenue. They provide, obviously, your updated values, and that kind of starts to control all sorts of things in terms of your financial decisions. One of them includes what your net new construction is, and that's your allowable levy increase for the year. So when we get into operations, we'll be talking to that more explicitly. But this was awesome news because you guys had a very good year in increased value, due both to economic appreciation and net new construction. So this will provide some more budgetary flexibility, meaning less pennies pinched. It doesn't mean that all problems are solved, but it just provided greater flexibility than our models, again, conservative, indicate. But we do take kind of some level of conservatism so that we can be proactive and have easier decisions if good news like this is released. So again, good news there with the preliminary EVs. Those are then certified on August 15th. So that'll be next week that we will get those final values. But we wanted to update the analysis with the preliminary value, assuming that there won't be any wild adjustments or the village making, a motion to try to change this, because good news. The second change was adding that 2027 debt issue. So that would be targeted to relieve the capital projects fund balance use that we had provided from last time, and I'll kind of go into that explicit kind of impact there, and then also identify what's the impact to the taxpayer. And then finally, provided an abated debt use analysis. So basically, another way to make sure that we're at least levying a certain amount for capital projects fund. Can we use some of this abated debt and not punish our tax rate? And then finally, does that maybe help us also limit debt as well in the future? That's kind of the whole goal behind your capital projects fund, right? We want to keep money in reserve so that, one, we can pay for those smaller expenditures, maybe shorter asset life expenditures, but also downsize for the larger projects so we're not borrowing as much. So it's always good to have good reserves on hand so that you can do that. That's part of the reason that you received an upgrade, is because of these budgetary decisions that we're making year over year in order to maintain these reserves and maintain the financial health of the village as a whole.
Did the credit rating go up before or after we saw the increase?
Before.
Before, okay. So does this help our credit rating in the future?
I would say yes. Any
doesn't hurt it. But.
Yeah, any big EV change is a good help to your credit rating. I think they suspected that you'd kind of continue on the trend that you were on and not exactly go explicitly to our model. So just know that we do send the financial management plan every year to Moody's to identify those, and we kind of use whatever your 5-year average is, but then discount that at a rate of 50% or 75% to be conservative. So they obviously suspected that things, based off of the economic discussion that Eileen had with them in our rating call this year, that that was going to probably continue to go up. Now we just have that data point, well, the preliminary data point, but soon-to-be data point, that actually came true.
This equalized value is for everything, right, in the village? Just
Yep.
Residential,
The entire,
business,
yep.
commercial, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
So then this next slide is to identify what was previously presented again. But for context, I did want to import the equalized value changes, because otherwise it just makes everything look so pretty on the new one if we don't identify, wait, in our old model, and we got this good news, and you're not saying that happened, the 2027 issuing debt kind of doesn't look the exact same. So this is the old model without 2027 debt. So the proof of that is there's no geo debt in that line for, I apologize, the years did not make it on there. But that is 27 and 28 for those final 2 years where you see a total of 3 million. So again, this is the previous model with no 2027 debt. And we wanted to show what was, under that plan, not issuing debt in 2027, what did that look like? So kind of to the bullet points at the bottom here, the max tax rate for debt was 80 cents per thousand of assessed value. The total costs of debt due to this capital improvement plan. So again, this is what the tax levy is just for debt service. That is to a sample taxpayer of $1,120 through 2040. So that just kind of decreased that because you have a lower tax rate inherently with adding value. And then a max percentage of your statutory limit of 40%, meaning we're only up to 40% of our total cap. And then for our desired limit, which is saying we're taking that statutory and splitting it in half, we're only at 80% of that with the increase in EVs. And then the other items identified there is utilities can cover the debt service that we've provided in that initial plan, but then there were still concerns of the capital projects fund, and those reserves are going down $1.9 million. So I just wanted to reiterate why we were looking at those other solutions so as to not deplete that capital projects fund. So we don't want to do the initial plan and allow that capital projects fund to go down. So we looked at adding 2027 debt as well as using your abated debt levy to kind of maintain that. So just adding the 2027 debt, this slide, which did incorporate the years on it, so I just wanted to reiterate the last slide again. It was 2023 through 2028. So this slide adds 2027 debt, no abated debt levy, but saying, if we're adding an issue in 2027, what are those impacts? So again, max tax rate for debt, we're able to structure 2027 debt around your existing debt, which is inclusive of this year's issue, 2023, and then would be inclusive of the projected issue for 2025, but basically saying we can structure that so your tax rate for debt doesn't go up, and so that's still 80 cents. However, you're paying more debt, obviously, by issuing more debt, so that total cost of debt is $1,300 and change through 2040 instead of the $1,100. So let's call that $200 extra over that time period from now until 2040. So that's not $200 a year, that's total spent through 2040. So if you want to annualize that, take that by 17. The max percentage of the statutory limit, again, we're able to structure around your existing debt by adding the 2027 issue. That's still 40% and 80% of our desired limit, so we're not getting up to our caps, is the good news there as well. And nothing changed with the utility consideration, but it did limit the diminishing capital projects fund reserve by about $1 million, right? We're adding close to $1 million, so now we're down to 0.9 million or 900,000 of depletion of those reserves in the capital projects fund. So now, beyond the 2027 issue, which I think is something obviously we don't say we're committing to funding, 5 years from now. This is all a plan to just kind of navigate as we go again. So we wanted to, provide that to you to just say there's little impact in adding the 2027 issue while also being able to maintain that capital projects fund. So we do think that's kind of an advantageous plan to hold for now. When we get to the point of executing a financing, of course, we'll go through different options at that point in time. But for now, kind of keeping that 2027 debt issue in the financial management plan, now adding an abated debt levy scenario to just kind of say, all right, if we were to add levy to the cap of what our abated debt is each year as we're allowed to under state statute, does that, penalize our tax rate is probably the first question we need to answer, right? We don't want that tax rate to go wildly up. We'd like to kind of stabilize that and maintain it at where it is. So what we've kind of solved this under is to keep your projected tax rate level or decreasing. And in that, we were able to do so and show this as kind of the max use of your abated debt. And therefore, please do not consider this as my recommendation, but rather kind of an understanding that you can do this without increasing the tax rate. And explicitly, we can project that out for 2024. So we have 2023 listed, and this chart is identified to break out your levy allocation by its use. So you have an existing debt on the first couple of columns on the way left in dark blue. Then your proposed debt, so this would be inclusive of the 2023 issue, just because the time that we put this plan together, that was still proposed, but technically now that's part of your debt, but just understand the 23 issues in there, the 25 issues in there, and the 2027 issue is in there for proposed debt. So you can get a sense of what's our tax rate for existing debt, what's our tax rate for proposed debt, and then looking at the other levy allocations, starting in purple with your proposed operations. And understand we go way more into depth into this, into a future workshop, but wanted to provide some context just to say, all right, if we increase that by 5%, let's just say across the board, doesn't matter what it's getting spent on for this workshop, we'll talk about that at a later one, but if we just increase that by 5%, kind of where does that put you for the operations levy allocation? And then beyond that, for the green is identifying what is our capital levy, meaning the levy dollars that we take in annually, what is being allocated to the capital projects fund. I'll remind you that that does a couple of things. One, pays for ongoing projects. Two, pays for those accumulating funds that we've talked about in terms of saving for a future project. And then three, can also go into the general, what we call like assigned future projects levy, fund balance, that would allow you to kind of reassign projects as they come along and continue to plan in the future. So again, that's the goal, is trying to not allow this proposed capital levy to drop significantly. And as you can see here, not moving the allocated debt into there, which is what would happen, but without the allocated debt, so just imagining that that isn't in our yellow column here, but just seeing what the proposed capital, that was our big issue, is this is dropping significantly, and you get to a point where you're not actually allowed to levy for capital, which has been a huge reason why you're in the financial position that you're in. So we don't want the green column to go to zero as it does here. So that's kind of why we're looking at the abated debt levy scenario. So in the yellow column, that's adding the abated debt, and basically understand there's a few columns shown for a reason. One is to say, the first one is to say, what's our max that we could use if we just had an infinite amount of abated debt? What's the max amount that we could use to still get to the same tax rate that we had last year? And then that should be ceiling number one. Ceiling number two is, of course, what is our debt abatement? And so what I mean by debt abatement is geo debt that's paid for by water revenues, sewer revenues, TID revenues, other revenues than your general levy. So as to say, this is our second ceiling, or the ceiling we can't go above. And then the third one is just taking, whatever the minimum is there between the two. So hopefully that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. But that's kind of where we get to. But that's what we're trying to solve for, right? Don't increase the tax. That's what this model does. Don't increase the tax rate. And we obviously can't do more than our abatement is that year. So solving for that, we get to the third column in yellow, which is our projected abatement use. And again, this should be seen as the max, not the recommendation. But just to kind of answer the question of what could we do with these abatements through the life of their amortization, and to say, what does our tax rate then look like? The one thing I'll note is the only thing we do know for the time being is 2024's value. We do not know beyond that point, but we've used that same level of conservatism, 50 to 75% discount rate on your 5-year average, which I think is noted at the bottom of this chart. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that percentage would be identified there to get to what is our tax rate here. So this is all to say, if you were to use your full allotment of your allowable abated debt for 2024, you keep that tax rate kind of where it's at. It's right now, $6.91 from last year's levy. It would go down to $6.68 for 2024.
So maybe I missed this in the green part. All right, so if I go to the 2 slides before.
Yep.
Before we got into the abated debt scenario, by offering the 2027 debt offering, we have solved $1 million of our $1.9 million capital project depletion problem.
Yep.
How much of that remaining $900,000 does this abated approach help us with? Or is it simply a tax rate control mechanism?
Right, so what it would do, and I kind of can show this in more detail on the full tables that were provided to staff, but essentially if you think about it, if you actually were to claim $600,000 for 2 years, as kind of shown here, you would wipe that out immediately. So that's why I say this should be seen as the max, not the recommendation per se. The one caveat that I gave to staff when kind of pre-presenting this is we don't want to go on the roller coaster with tax rates. So the one thing I would say is use more sooner. Don't kind of decide, well, maybe not this year, and then all of a sudden we realize next year, new project came up, sorry, wasn't in the capital plan. Now we want to use that abated debt levy scenario. That was a good idea. If you were to say, take this to 0, which you have been doing, that tax rate drops to I think it was like $5.14 or something like that. And then if you all of a sudden decided to use it, right, we're jacking that back up if your equalized values don't have the champagne clinking that we were doing as a result of this year's release, so. Yeah.
That's a technical finance.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, does this model anticipate the TID 4 closure?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
Down the road, not in it. Yeah.
That was last year's champagne.
Yeah, right. So I will say, as Eileen and I talked about this, one of the benefits that this will provide, the valuations coming out, is basically we get another chance to do what we did last year with the TID closure, right? That provided about $100,000 of flexibility. With your net new construction change, I think it was almost equal. It was around $100,000, if I'm remembering correctly. But again, it's something that if you don't, first, obviously, we're going to use that full portion of your allowable levy before we even talk about the debt adjustment, which is infinite in theory. But you want to use that maximum allowable levy because if you don't use it, you lose it. So again, we want to use our net new construction, and that's going to happen. I know we have enough stuff going on in operations that that's going to happen. This is supposed to identify, before we get to that operating scenario, is the board understanding of the benefits of the equalized value in the tune of what the tax rate does, which will go down, but kind of where do we want to go financially into the future to kind of tackle this, and maybe we start to actually make some more fun decisions. Tax rate can go down, but we can still be replenishing this capital projects fund. And so one of my thoughts were, if we just kind of run with the model, of course, beyond 2024, we can't control anything right now. It's all projected hearsay. But do we want to run with the scenario? We want to try to keep that at $400,000 for the time being, and kind of say that that's what our target would be for use of abated debt, and that would still have a 0 abated debt for 2024 understanding we haven't fully gotten into the operations yet, but right now we have $35,000 of wiggle room beyond 5% increase across the board for every expenditure that levy dollars went to operations last year. We'll get into this in more detail, but just kind of preliminarily, is there one, an understanding of the benefits that we have here to kind of maintain our tax rate and the benefit that that'll do to not roller coaster it? And then two, is there some sort of target for the capital projects fund for like an annual levy there that we just kind of want to keep on an ongoing basis so we can navigate that as equalized values come out, of course, but just to kind of identify that initial target. So that was kind of some of the goals and understanding. We'll flush out true numbers as we get into the department by department budgets for the next workshop and get to a true number in our purple column for operating levy, but just kind of speaking to capital levy, that was kind of the goals and of this exercise.
So I think about the rate part of your question. When we had the discussion about the water rate, I think that's always our big problem is, all of a sudden things go up dramatically. So I think controlling that, I think given the equalized value benefit that we have coming and also the improved revenue sharing from the state, I want to be able to show the taxpayers that this isn't a money grab by us.
Right.
This is, we're providing the services and the rate is actually going down, so we need to show that while you said controlling the funds and keeping them, so we have that rainy day. I think that's been the great thing about the village is that we've always had that rainy day there, and occasionally we've had to go use it, but then we were smart and we go back and we replenish it. And I think that's been the concern that you've appropriately raised with us this year and last year, and we're working towards solving, which is that capital fund. We had the same thing about equipment replacement fund, and Jason's been working on that. Same thing in the water utility. So these are all being made with those, all these decisions are being made with those intentions. I guess when I look at your wonderful pivot chart and I look at, tax levy, it is for 23 just over 400,000, then it's 346, 347, 269, 130. And I get looking too far out from a capital standpoint. It's like, well, we just don't have the projects really. And I'm trying to remember some of your graphs, Eileen, but I would think that somewhere in the $400,000 to $500,000 range each year, and not all of that going to projects, but helping to supplement that balance there so that we're not as reliant upon debt. It is what my gut tells me, but these are very complicated models, so I don't know if I said that right.
You did, yep.
All right, she says she agrees, you said you agree. All right.
No, I just said that would have been my response. I was thinking 400,000 is where we have been levying. And will that give us enough wiggle room to address some of those future needs? So maybe we could look at the model and what that looks like in that $500,000 range and see if we're comfortable with that.
Yep.
And I know I would never ask you to put this in a model, but due to the great staff that we have, we most of the time come back with some amount of surplus at the end of each year. It's not a guarantee. It's kind of like, do you get a bonus at your job? You can't bank on that, but reminding our residents that we take that money and other than maintaining our fund balance, we dump a lot of that back into capital for this very reason. So I think as long as we continue with that policy, we should be in good shape.
Understood.
I will say, too, that I just want to add to that, when Moody's did our rating and our rate increase, one of the things they mentioned is that exact practice, that we're taking surpluses and applying it to capital projects.
Everybody awake?
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions for Brian? All right. Do you have anything more?
Nope, we'll be back to kind of talk about that. The last slide, just kind of, I spoke to it on the previous one, but we'll be back once we analyze operations and kind of update everything, so.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item B, which is changes in service levels for preliminary operations budget information and net new construction. So there is a memo here in your packet from Eileen regarding service levels, preliminary wage and benefit assumptions, board salaries, and then what we've already kind of touched on, the net new construction. So if we take the service levels, this is an opportunity for us to highlight the staff changes to service levels. Are we asking for an additional service level? Are we asking for a reduction in something for some item? And Eileen's included a few examples here. So thoughts, discussion? I think
Regarding service levels, is this where we start talking about adding another police officer?
that was going to be my question.
That's my question.
We've already been directed to include that in the operational budget, so that already is in the draft operations budget, offset by the shared revenue. And Josh, I just want to state, I had no idea our net new construction was going to be as phenomenal as it was when you and I started talking about a new officer, so.
Any other service levels that we're looking to expand? I think when I think about our services, it's mostly constrained by what capital we can offer physically. So that's probably where I would look more to it. But is there some day-to-day service levels that we're looking to expand?
No, there was that talk at a Park and Rec meeting about potentially having additional staff next year, but the individual involved in that proposal has not come forth with a business plan yet, so nothing there.
Okay, we'll move on to wage and benefit assumptions. You can see here the assumption is a 3% adjustment to salary schedule for inflation, cost of living, and a 3% increase for employees within the performance range. There's the usual about health insurance, seeing increases 14%. That being said, possibility may be decreasing by renewing. As always, insurance is kind of a hit or miss. And you see some other inflationary rates there. Any changes or direction to staff on these assumptions? You know, we did the market adjustment last year for staff, just trying to keep it close to market.
Makes perfect sense.
All right, board salaries. I had asked staff to take a look and just evaluate other municipalities, including the towns. And you'll see here that there's an attachment. I think we're pretty much right in line with Waterford's pretty high, but so.
They've had a lot of troubles.
Even though, I was surprised. I thought we were going to be much less than what I would have expected to see, and I can't say that this is a big disparity at all.
I think we just leave things the way they are right now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, makes that easy. And then we talked a lot about the net new construction here. Any comments or questions for Eileen?
How did you find out? Did it come in an envelope or what?
No, so they
Publishers
are,
Clearinghouse.
As Brian had mentioned, they are preliminary numbers, but I was very excited about them, so I wanted to share them. But they're preliminary; they'll be official as of August 15th. But we get a notification for the Department of Revenue that they're releasing the preliminary numbers. So yeah, so that's how I got them, and there was nobody left in the office, so I sent Matt a message and said, oh my gosh. So,
The manufacturing went up way big time.
a lot of that increase, like in the commercial, is related to the TID developments.
You good on direction? Okay. Anything else for Eileen? All right, we'll move on to the next item. Verbal update from Brian from Ellers on status of water utility rate case. No packet materials.
So since I was here and we did file the case, I just thought it might be wise to update the board in terms of, we obviously provide, we have a model that projects what the PSC application will do, but then you actually have to go through the effort of the fund PSC application. And if you don't recall, what we had projected was a 22% adjustment to what they call rate revenues. So that's your rates across the board. Typically, what it ends up being for a customer bill is somewhere in the neighborhood of 95 to like 102% because they end up doing what's called a cost of service study and allocating that. But just understand it's a good indicator what will your bill go up by. So it's an important percentage to understand. We went through, filed the rate case at a 21.9% adjustment. So somehow or some way, the model was very close to where we went to. We did put that in at the PSC benchmark rate of return. That's all to say this isn't wishful thinking. We're not expecting that the PSC would push that up. But for any findings they would say are shortfalls within the water utility, which we don't see based off of our review, and that's a third-party review of course, your utility operations. So I would fully anticipate we end up around that point. We'll kind of keep you apprised as we go. There's now kind of a 2-month cricket period that I like to call, where we don't hear from the PSC, and then they'll send us a bunch of fun questions, and we'll have to go through kind of those questions with staff, and then they'll finally release the revenue requirement, which will give us the actual percentage that they'll change our revenues by. But I just wanted to update you that no real changes to the 22% that we had previously provided, and I believe that was in March, if I recall correctly, when I was here at the committee of the whole. Yeah.
Question?
Didn't we discuss at the time that we were thinking of either going one of two ways? You were going to increase for like just a year or two, or like for a span of like 5 years. Am I correct?
Correct. That was the discussion prior to the committee of the whole at the board meeting. We talked about 2 scenarios, and then the board selected doing the rate case.
And we kind of looked at the 5-year, the full.
Yep.
And because I guess I'm mentioning this because of the fact when you start hearing these percentages, I want to make sure it's not going to happen every year.
Correct.
That's what I want to impart.
Yep. Correct. This would be the one time, and then I'll note too that as part of the FMP, we also update your long-range cash flow, so we'll be able to implement kind of those decisions in that. So you would see for the water utility what our 10-year projection of any sort of rate recommendations would be. Likely, if you recall, that'll be as a result of any inflationary assumptions we make for the water utility, meaning we would follow suit with 3% or whatever the simplified rate is at that time.
I think it's important to note, too, one of the reasons the board selected the option rather than going 5 years is because of the concerns regarding the cash flow projections if
Yep.
they didn't.
Yep.
Other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're done for tonight. All right, item 5, consideration of state/municipal agreement for Transportation Alternative Program, TAP, grant awarded for construction of multi-use trail from along Highway 20. Jason is on vacation this evening. You see his memo there and his recommendation.
Yippee. I will move to approve the state municipal agreement for the TAP program to be used for the multi-use trail from Mill Pond Park to Honey Creek Road.
Any discussion or questions?
Is this just for approving this, or are we going to be looking at some of the other items that are listed, the next steps, or is that in a different time?
We'll need to pursue these steps, but this is the first step in proceeding forward. Anything else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to ordinances and resolutions. Consider approval of ordinance 2023-06, revising the comprehensive plan. So you see there's a memo there from Tim Schwecke, zoning administrator. And so before I open the public hearing, any questions on this? Okay, I will officially open the public hearing.
John?
Since John's on the Plan Commission, I would hope he would not have any questions.
Last chance, John.
All right. That said, I will close the public hearing and ask for action from the board.
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 2023-06 as drafted based on the findings contained in the ordinance.
I'll second it.
Okay, any other discussion?
Is it a resolution?
My paper here says ordinance 2023-06.
Yeah, but then.
Well, I understand. I'm just reading what the proposed motion should adoption.
So it is an ordinance. The Plan Commission adopts a resolution, so that's what you're seeing with the Plan Commission adopted as their recommendation to the board.
Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Reports, emergency services, 621. Any questions for Jason? I will see you tomorrow night to budget.
I would like to just mention the fact that I'm very happy with the work that this group is doing, the whole board with Ms. Church and Jason and everybody else that's in there. I'm impressed, and you guys, it's working out real well, and I want to thank you.
Ditto. Okay, on to July financial report. Any questions for Eileen? I got a head shake from 40, so I'm going to move on quickly. Item 3, administrator's report. Any questions for Eileen? This is, I think, just as it's long, but is a short snapshot of all that she and the admin staff do for us.
This sheet I got is just one long sentence without any punctuation whatsoever.
I want to clarify.
That's all.
They know normal people don't normally read that stuff, so that's how that works. All right.
Did you say normal people don't
Yes.
read it, or normally people don't read it?
I'll let you pull the tape. Okay. Any other questions for Eileen? All right. Since we are already in open session, there's no need to reconvene in open session, so I will make a motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.